My name's Tom Singer, and this is Concert Cues. This year we get to do concert cues a little differently than we have for the past few years. Today, I'm in the Lockwood High School auditorium, and it's 5 days before the concert. That's because of COVID-19. It's created all kinds of interesting opportunities for us this year. One of which is that I get to interview a guest that I would never otherwise get to interview, and that's our director. Usually, she's preparing for the concert downstairs and not available for me to talk to. But it's Tuesday, and she's got time between now and the concert to discuss some things with us. So I'd like to welcome Anne Harrigan, mispronounce her name, that's good, Anne Harrigan, to Concert Cues for the first time ever. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is the first time ever, isn't it?
It is.
But, it's a lot of fun, and I'm happy to be able to talk to everybody. Thank you, Tom, for running the Concert Cues for so many years and doing such a wonderful job, and for continuing to help us out with that. It's a lot of fun.
So I think the place we ought to start, you've been music director at the Billings Symphony for how long?
This is my 15th year, I believe.
I think that sounds about right. And so people know your face and they know your directing style and that sort of thing, but I suspect there's a lot of people who don't know much about your background. And I've always been fascinated by the fact that you didn't come from a musical family.
That's true. That's true. There's a lot of conductors who grew up with conducting. Their parents were professional musicians or even conductors, but not the case with me. I am first generation off the farm. I grew up in Minnesota. My parents both grew up in rural Minnesota. In fact, my mom grew up on a farm with no electricity, no running water, and one winter, the house burned down, and they spent the winter in a chicken coop. This is God's truth. So I think that in some ways it helps me to connect with people because I really have known a lot of people from different walks of life. My dad was a lawyer, an attorney like you, Tom, in fact also a sole practitioner and a trial attorney. And so I think that I learned to be cross-examined at a young age.
I will try not to do that to you today.
Oh no, what a good conversation, Socratic conversation, how's that? But my dad was starting out when I was young and there was not much money available. And I remember when I was 10 years old, I got it in my head, and I don't know why, I got it in my head I wanted to play the piano. I think a neighbor played the piano. Might have been even a boy I had a crush on, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Doesn't it? So I decided that I wanted a piano for Christmas, and that just wasn't possible, or at least that was what was told to me, and I said, well, that's okay. You remember the Sears Roebuck catalog, Tom?
Oh, sure.
And my brothers would go through and they'd pick out what they wanted. My mom would say, what do you want for Christmas? I'd say, I want a piano. She'd say, you can't have a piano. So that's okay, I'm good, maybe next year. So I should mention that I'm half Irish and half German. Two very stubborn streaks in me. And so we just kept going, but it wasn't even that. I really didn't want anything except a piano. Well, lo and behold, my dad made a deal with a client who owned a bar. And he got a piano very cheaply, and it arrived. And I remember my two brothers looking at that thing and saying, I don't want to listen to that. And so it ended up in my bedroom. And that's probably why I became so involved with music, because it was always there for me. Well, the next year I said, I want to play the clarinet. And my mom was ready for me. She was so ready. She says, no, absolutely not. We can't afford it. You have to wait until we get to public school, because I was in Catholic school at the time. It was expensive to play the clarinet. So once you get into middle school, junior high we called it at the time, you can play the clarinet. Well, unfortunately, that was 2 years later, and I show up and I'm ready. All right, sign me up for the clarinet. And the band teacher said this to me, I'm sorry, young lady, but everybody else has been playing for 2 years. You'll never catch up. I was shocked, just shocked. What am I going to do now? And they said, maybe the orchestra will take you. Now, you have to remember that I came from a family who knew nothing about music. I was like, great. What's an orchestra? I don't care, I'll play anything. And I met the most amazing man I've ever met in my life. Older gentleman, he had polio. And he had this limp from polio, and he kind of came limping up to me, Mr. Berg, and he says, here, let me show you the instruments. I picked the smallest one, which was the violin. And that was the beginning of my musical career. I was 13 years old.
Well, let's skip ahead, because just before we were talking here, we were talking about fiddling now, and apparently you're still playing the violin.
Yes, well, I took a 30-year break from playing. I played in college. I went to Peabody Conservatory, And I played, and then I played a little bit in graduate school. I didn't practice in graduate school because I was studying conducting and there was no time, but I did play in orchestra and have the opportunity to play under some great conductors. And then I put the instrument away for a long, long time, and I would pull it out once a year for Christmas. We were kind of talking about that, but I really wasn't studying. And then about 3 years ago, I was in Scotland, and I was seeing my daughter, and I went to sessions in Scotland looking at Irish music, which I'd always loved. I thought, why am I not playing? This is crazy. I used to be able to play really well. And so I started practicing, and I actually, about a year ago, I started taking private lessons, interestingly, Skype lessons, and I've been taking them for a year. So when the shutdown happened, I was ready to help other people who were stopped dead. A lot of people had no idea what to do, and they said, you can't teach a violin or fiddle by Skype. I said, I've been doing it for a year, and I continue to do it. I had a lesson today in the studio at the Billings Symphony. And so I do play, but I don't play classical because I would have to practice 2-3 hours a day to keep up with my colleagues, and I wouldn't, measure up. And I love Irish music. It's a different approach.
So let's take a step back. You mentioned that you were taking conducting. How do you go from piano and violin to conducting? Why not just stick with the instrument?
Well, that's a very good question, and I went to Peabody Conservatory at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. I love the violin. I was actually going to be a teacher, like my teacher. And while I was there, I got involved with Johns Hopkins University, which had just merged or had affiliated with Peabody. I think they sort of saved Peabody, to tell you the truth. Peabody was in some financial difficulty. And I found that even though I had thought I wanted to go to conservatory and I didn't want to take all those French and history and English classes that were taking up so much time in high school and away from my practicing, I found I was intellectually missing them. Because in the conservatory, your classes were music theory, music appreciation, orchestra, lessons, and that was about the sum and total of it. So I was one of the first 3 people at Peabody Conservatory to sign up for classes, take the bus up to Johns Hopkins University. And while I was there, I started an orchestra. Why did I start an orchestra? I'm not sure. I think I wanted to be up at Peabody, up at Hopkins more, but I was really interested in the concept of the orchestra because with the violin, I was in the practice room 8 hours a day, and I was practicing. And remember, I started when I was 13 years old, and these other folks had started when they were 2. I was never going to catch up. But the orchestra had the history to it, it had languages, it had philosophy, and I like to talk a lot. And you get to talk to people. And so I found that in the first 6 months, I was instinctively a much better conductor than I was a violinist. And then I put it away, because I also discovered from a great teacher I had, he says, if you want to be a great conductor, you must be a very good violinist. So I put a pause in conducting, and I really focused on my violin studies and my music education studies and ear training. And I didn't get involved again seriously in conducting until after I finished my degree.
So one of the things that I heard about conducting years ago that's always fascinated me is that it takes a particular kind of personality for someone to walk up in front of a full house of people and turn their back to them for the remainder of the performance. And I'm, what kind of personality is that? What is it that prompts you to have the confidence to say, I can turn my back on you and still impress you?
I've never thought of it that way. I think what happens is once you turn around, you're just so immersed with the orchestra and the music, you forget the audience is there until you turn back around again. It's not that you're turning your back away from the audience. You're turning yourselves to the music, and you're sharing the music with the audience. And so I've never thought of it that way. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I do a little theater at times. And of course, that breaks all the rules of theater. You never turn your back to the audience.
Right, that's true.
And yet you do that constantly when you're on stage.
I think I'm more comfortable. I'm actually get a little nervous. Like, this is very nerve-wracking to me, having to face the people. I'm so used to the comfort of them knowing they're here and sort of feeling them back there, but not having them actually look at me. So I don't know. It's just what I grew up with.
So,
in my short time, as I grew up with.
so I'm going to shock you. I'm going to tell you they are looking at you.
Oh, no.
So let's talk about this concert that's coming up this weekend. What are we playing?
Well, we are performing two pieces that are almost being universally played around the world. And it's interesting because, of course, this is the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. And so many people are playing Beethoven, and we have been, it's been all of 2020. So it's been a worldwide Beethoven celebration. Originally, we were going to do Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and we originally were going to have the opening of the ABT. And of course, when those two things changed, I thought about the most joyous, the most optimistic piece that Beethoven ever written, and there's no question, it's the Seventh Symphony. In fact, Richard Wagner, the famous German composer, called it the apotheosis of the dance.
And so we get to do the 7th instead of the 9th.
Yes.
I'm kind of fond of the 9th, but the 7th is a great choice. And you've paired it with Tchaikovsky.
I did. I paired it with Tchaikovsky's Serenade. And that's another thing, you know, we're all missing the big orchestral works, but part of this, in order to come together and make music, we have to socially distance. I don't know if audiences can see, we are 10 feet apart right now during this interview. And in order to perform at the beautiful Lockwood Performing Arts Center, we have to be distanced at least 6 feet or more. And so many orchestras have interestingly turned to one of my favorite string pieces, which is the Serenade for Strings. And I'm guessing among conductors there's a lot of nostalgia, because probably every single conductor who has ever studied conducting studied the Serenade in graduate school. In fact, I'm betting that my assistant Matthew studied the Serenade for Strings. And it's not even called the Serenade for Strings, it's called the Serenade, but it's written for string orchestra, and we all call it the Serenade for Strings. It's a beautiful piece. It's an homage to Mozart, and it has 4 movements. Starts with a slow section, and then a very lively dance-like section. And then the second movement is a waltz, which is interesting because symphonically, typically the third movement was the dance. And in Mozart and Haydn's time, it was a minuet. Of course, Beethoven did 1 minuet in the first symphony, and then he threw that out the window, and he did what's called a scherzo, which is faster, and scherzo is Italian for joke. And Tchaikovsky took it one step further, and he introduced the waltz into many of his pieces. And I learned in doing some research that the waltz was quite racy, very racy, because you had couples who weren't in lines. They were actually embracing, and that was really something. So Tchaikovsky embraced the waltz as again, iconoclastic form of dance. And so he has a waltz in the second movement, not the third movement, which is highly unusual. It's kind of breaking the rules its own way. And then the third movement has this beautiful elegy, which is just gorgeous and intimate and has that Russian feeling. You know, the Russians are famous for being all the way out there or very internal. And Tchaikovsky started this, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, they followed along this line. And then the last movement is called, I think, Tema Rustica, or Russian themes, and it has 2 Russian folk dances.
Well, and apparently Tchaikovsky wrote this piece at the same time he was writing a very boisterous 1812 Overture.
I know, exactly the same year, 1880. And what's interesting, when he wrote, he wasn't really very fond of the 1812 Overture. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I perform it as often as I can. He loved this piece. Now, the way that he says he loved this piece, and he wrote to his patron, he says, it's not bad. It's not lacking in qualities, which means he really thought it was good.
Well, and it's interesting to me that this is the first time the orchestra has performed the entire piece.
Isn't that fascinating?
In Billings.
The first time in the history of the Billings Symphony, this is our 70th anniversary, by the way, and it's the first time that they've performed the Serenade for Strings. Now, I get it. When you have an orchestra, especially a professional orchestra, you have a full orchestra and you're paying them all, you want to make good use of everybody. So you don't do a full, this is a big string piece, but but I thought at least at one time they would have done it. What's nice for me, though, is this is something when I conducted the Baltimore Chamber Orchestra, I did a number of times. So there's a sense of nostalgia of coming back to something very familiar for me personally, and I adore the piece.
I'm wondering if the choice to not do it has something to do with the popularity of the Nutcracker and the 1812 and some of his concertos that you sort of feel you have to do, and this one keeps kind of getting shuffled down into, well, maybe next year category.
It's absolutely true. I know that that's the case because I have thought a lot of times, well, we should do the Serenade for strings, but you don't typically in a concert series like we have 6, now 7 concerts, you don't do 2 Tchaikovskys, or you do a Tchaikovsky symphony, and we do the Nutcracker every year. So I think you're right. It did kind of get into the, well, we'll get to it another time. But what's interesting, because there's a lot of pieces for string orchestra, but almost every orchestra in the world, and there's not very many of them, and even fewer that are performing with audiences, but almost every orchestra in the world is playing the Serenade this year. Isn't that fascinating?
It will be a very popular piece after this year.
I think it will be. I think people will love it. And I love the idea of thinking about, Berlin Philharmonic, Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, Minnesota Orchestra, Philadelphia Orchestra, that there's a sense of commonality and we're all playing the same incredibly beautiful piece during this time in which we really need beauty and consolation and inspiration more than I think ever in my entire life.
So the pairing again of the 7th Symphony of Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, at least the video that's on the website has a much larger orchestra than will fit on the stage for the 7th Symphony. Will it be a large orchestra for us?
We will have about 33 players. Now remember, Tom, I conducted the Baltimore Chamber Orchestra for 20 years, and we had 30 to 33 players. And so I did all the Beethoven symphonies except the 9th there, and that is very typical of one of the ways you could do it. So it'll be very effective. Sometimes orchestras will use a very large string section. What's different is that when you only have 6 first violins instead of 12, then it really puts it on everybody, but you also get to hear everybody very well.
So that's a choice that's being driven by COVID, I assume?
Yes, that's a choice that's being driven by COVID because everything, we mapped this out. I don't know if we waited a week or two. I think there was a couple minutes in which we thought this will all work itself out by April and we'll be done. I remember when we canceled our April concert, I thought, that's being a little premature.
Not so.
Here we are 6 months later.
Yeah.
But
So what else is the symphony doing to deal with the COVID thing? How are you making people feel safe?
Oh, thanks for asking. We are using an abundance of caution. We've been studying all of the reports and studies and research papers that have come out of Germany, Freiburg, Colorado, Minnesota, everything we could find. I consult with members of the CDC, we consult with the health department, and we have looked at every possible opportunity. So one of the things you'll notice that'll be different is that everybody in the orchestra will be socially distanced. And we started putting together drawing stage plots the minute we even thought about opening up. And so everybody's got a place, and you'll see that the strings are distanced by 6 feet and the winds are a little farther apart. The strings will all be masked. I'll be masked. Our audiences will be distanced, although if people are like couples, they'll be sitting together. But Michelle Dawson put together stage plots. We have hand sanitizers everywhere possible. We are cleaning everything, and we are having a maximum of 200 people in the audience. And we have a live stream capability, which is brand new for us. So every Saturday night for $10, or if you're a subscriber for free, you can tune in, and I think you get your ticket ahead of time. You go to our website and get your ticket, and you can tune in and you can see the best seats in the house, get to see what's going on. And I was just talking to somebody with 4 different cameras, so you can see the close-up. For example, when the oboe is playing their solo, you will really see the oboe. And so it's great. It's interesting because it's creative too. You have to make a decision. There's a conductor of the video who has to decide, well, what's the most important part? And it might be the melody, it might be the counter melody. So you may hear and see some things because of the video that you thought, oh, I didn't know that Shelley were playing this at this point. So we have live tickets available. Saturday night is sold out. We have Saturday afternoon at 2. We have seats available. And then Sunday afternoon. And then Saturday night, we have this live stream capability in which you can watch on your computer for a very reasonable price. Other mitigation things, we're having hand sanitizers for everybody. We're doing temperature checks. We're doing daily health assessments. I had to fill out one today, you know, taking your temperature and asking if you have the symptoms. And we have a task force made up of doctors and musicians who have been watching this for months very closely. So I feel like we're using an abundance of caution. It's very, very important that everybody is safe and feels safe. And of course, nothing is perfect, but God willing, everybody will do well and will make beautiful music.
With smaller orchestras.
With smaller orchestras.
So you mentioned the ABT. We're sitting here in the Lockwood Auditorium, which is a beautiful facility. It's my first time in it. I'm looking forward to hearing something here. But maybe you can give us a status report on ABT, because I think our viewers may be interested in that as well.
Well, if you've seen downtown, they're working like crazy, and I know they are hoping to be going live in September, and we're hoping to have Beethoven's Ninth at that point.
September, a year from now?
A year from now, yeah. In order to be at the ABT, we'll have to be in phase 3, I believe. You know, that could change. So that's basically the metric, I think, that we'll use to decide. Until then, I want to say we are extremely grateful to Lockwood Schools, who embraced us at our time of need, and to let us kind of come in here in this state-of-the-art, beautiful auditorium with an incredible filtration system, I should mention. You know, everything you could possibly want during a pandemic. And for me, it's satisfying because this is going to go on for a while. We have to learn to live with it by being extremely careful. I should have mentioned the audience is all masked. Also, they have to wear masks. But in order to come together and make music, it's so satisfying. On Monday, I came and I heard the chorale at First Presbyterian Church. They were singing, masked, all spread out, and it was the most beautiful sound I had heard in ages.
It's live music.
It's live music, and you know, I've been watching, I've been supporting all these different organizations, and I want to support arts organizations because this is a tough time. But when I heard that live, it just kind of hit me like a wave. I think people will feel that here too.
I think they will too. Anne, this has been really fun. Thank you.
It has been fun. Thank you, Tom.